We've seen Jon Jones beat the old guard of the UFC light heavyweight division, the Shogun Huas, the Lyoto Machidas, the Rampage Jacksons. We've seen him beat his contemporaries in the UFC light heavyweight division, guys like Alexander Gustafsson and Daniel Cormier. And now it's time for Jon Jones to face the new guard of the division. On Saturday night here at T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas at UFC 235, Jon Jones defends his light heavyweight title against Anthony Smith, the youngest man, even though the most experienced man that he's defended his title against yet. I'm Marc Raimondi from MMAfighting.com. This is the UFC 235 preview show here with the man in the hat, Chuck Mindenhall, Shaun Al-Shatti, and we're going to break down the fights coming to you guys on Saturday. We're going to start with you, Chuck. Main event, of course, Jon Jones, Anthony Smith. Very interesting fight because Anthony Smith is a younger guy than Jon Jones, but he's also oddly more experienced than Jon Jones. He's been through a number of wars. He's kind of a journeyman who has risen up the ranks to fight for this title. What is your take on this story, the dominant champion against someone who was kind of a journeyman who's come up?
Man, I really love it because it's rare that you see this kind of matchup these days where there's a guy who has come up unlikely through an unlikely set of circumstances. Essentially, it was 5 and 6 at one point in his career on the regional scene, not even in the UFC. He's fighting at a completely different weight class, and yet he comes up, he wins 6 of 7. I don't know how many people really saw him coming. He lost a fight to begin last year, not even like a year ago, which is a really good fight, by the way. He showed a lot of heart in that fight out in Brazil, but he was able to win those fights, come back. I like that sort of thing. I always love to see these guys who are kind of out of nowhere underdogs who rise up. It's the true Rocky sense, like with these guys who you never see them coming and then they get their shot. I always like to see that because there should be something for everybody in this game, and I think that's a big part of the population.
We've been talking a lot about the odds for this fight, and,
yes.
and Jon Jones is as high as a 14-1 favorite in the fight. But yet people are saying that is too high, yet they're also saying that Anthony Smith, if he wins, it might be the biggest upset in UFC history. So what is your take on that? Are the odds too high, and would that fight, if that upset were to happen, be the biggest one in UFC history?
Well, I would start by first saying that only one sportsbook has the 14-1 line. That is, I believe, like one sportsbook over in Europe. Everyone else is kind of settled around like 9-1, 8-1, which feels more right. 14-1 is incredibly disrespectful. As Anthony Smith told you on Wednesday, a dead body should have better odds than 14-1. That being said, I will say a win by Anthony Smith on Saturday, in my mind, would absolutely eclipse Matt Serra versus GSP as the biggest upset in UFC history. I mean, like Chuck said, this is the ultimate underdog story. This is someone who shuffled in and out of the UFC. He was in Strikeforce Challengers. He was in Bellator. There you go. He has been
big Lionheart fan.
He has been everywhere you could be in this sport, and somehow he really discovered himself within the last couple years, and especially at this run in light heavyweight, in a way that I don't think anybody expected. To be able to come in here and beat a man who is one of the greatest, if not the single greatest fighter of all time, that would absolutely eclipse Serra GSP to me as the biggest upset ever.
So I guess one of the lingering things too, Chuck, and it may be a lingering thing in the rest of Jon Jones' career with this whole situation where the long-term metabolite for the steroid oral turnable metabolite keeps turning up in his system, and they're saying that it's pulsing and it's in some tests, it's not in some other tests. News came out earlier this week that it was in 2 recent tests from earlier this month, but he's cleared the fight. They're saying it's not giving him any kind of performance-enhancing edge, the same way that he was able to fight Alexander Gustafsson back in December.
Yeah.
Is this still part of the story, or should we move on at this point?
It's very tough because I think it is part of the story. I mean, we had to ask Anthony Smith about it going in, and he's not surprised. At this point, I feel like you have to kind of trust that they know what they're doing, that they're going on good faith, that the commission understands what is happening enough to make this a sanctionable fight, and that's what they're doing. So at this point, if you want Jon Jones competing and you want to be here to cover Jon Jones fights, you're going to have, if you want to put the asterisks on it, that's okay, but I think that they get smaller and smaller, like the picogram size. But at this point, I personally, I look at it as something I felt like it was somewhat inevitable that it was going to come up in his test again. It's expected. So to me, it wasn't a big story, but I think it has to remain part of the larger story that goes forward.
Very quickly, Shaun, do you feel like it was a little bit of a different Jon Jones this week? It felt like he was a looser guy than he has been in previous fight weeks.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think there's any question, and I think that's actually been one of the most interesting parts of this week to me, because it almost feels like a young Jon Jones. It almost feels like the Jon Jones before we went through all of the BS that we have been through with him over the last 4 or 5 years. He's back able to compete again in his element. It's a quick turnaround for him. He's been waiting for really this moment, this stretch for years at this point. You think of how much time of this man's prime has been lost for various reasons. And now he's back and he's healthy, he's in his element. It's absolutely he has been happy. You can tell he is excited to be here. He's been loose. It's been interesting to see. I think it's been a Jon Jones that's maybe more easy to relate to, a more humanized Jon Jones than maybe the negativity Jon Jones that we've seen in the past. And I also think part of that too is that this matchup hasn't really had a lot of negativity. Anthony Smith has talked about it this week where Daniel Cormier, Alexander Gustafsson, those guys really got sucked down the whirlpool with Jon Jones about the drug testing and the trash talk and all of the stuff that kind of floats around the periphery with Jon. Anthony Smith hasn't played that game. He has tried to stay positive. He's tried to focus on himself, not worry about the picograms and the trash talk. It's been pretty interesting to watch.
So Chuck, Anthony Smith, huge underdog. Yeah. Jon Jones, always a big favorite in these fights. How do you see it going? Who wins?
It's tough too, right? Because you look at a guy like Anthony Smith and you realize he's kind of playing with house money a little bit. I feel like he's in this situation and the pressure's really not on him. I think just by having those extreme odds against him, nobody's really expecting him to go out there and get it done. Now, when you talk to him and he says something about like, what happens when I punch him in the face and he realizes he's in a dogfight, he realizes he's in a fight, can he dig as deep as I want to dig? And that's always the question, right? This just becomes the part of the imagination. There's a part of me that could see that happening where there's an early exchange and somehow Jon Jones gets rocked a little bit and it becomes a completely different fight at that moment. Do I think it happens? No, probably not. But I could see a situation, obviously, where that would. I think ultimately Jon Jones is probably too good. And I think that when it really comes down to it, when the reality of the moment and how big everything seems and the first exchanges are going on, I think we'll see that right away. The experience will come out and Jones will get in his element and probably get it done.
Shaun, Jon Jones, Anthony Smith, who you got?
As incredible as it would be, and it really would be just a historically incredible story, performance, to see Anthony Smith be able to pull this upset. The way Jon Jones tore through Alexander Gustafsson just 2 months ago was eye-opening. I mean, this has been a Jon Jones that we haven't, he outclassed him in every regard, and it is hard for me to see Anthony Smith beating that Jon Jones, because this is very much that Jon Jones. This is a new Jon Jones compared to the Jon Jones. I've said Jon Jones a lot, but compared to the Jon Jones of the past few years, I have to pick Jon Jones. It's just too difficult to visualize Anthony Smith coming out here and pulling off the upset on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to pick against Jon Jones really in any fight. Moving on now to the co-main event, Tyron Woodley defending his UFC welterweight title against Kamaru Usman. First thing for you, Chuck, I want to ask you, should this have been the fight? Because we were just out here a few minutes ago and Colby Covington was here and there were a few fans gathered around and he was kind of doing his part to drum up interest for him getting the next title fight, but should it have been him instead of Usman in this fight?
Marc, let me tell you something. When opportunity arrives, you take. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, Dana White Mindenhall.
I didn't feel like they could go wrong, to be completely honest. I was actually, Usman to me had earned it as well. I know that there's a guy with an interim title, and that should automatically get him there, even if there is a timing discrepancy. You could see how something like that. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, I don't think this is hurting Colby Covington at all, really, other than not getting a paycheck right away. He's out here getting as much publicity, if not more, than most of these fighters on this card. So he's doing his job. He'll be there ringside if Woodley's able to win it. And everything goes according to Doyle. I think the bottom line is he's the next guy in line, and as long as that's the case, I feel like it'll end tidily. But I have no problem with this. I like Usman in there too, and he's held up. To be honest, man, he has convinced me more that he belongs there as we've gotten closer to the fight.
Yeah, and to your point, Colby Covington invaded the open workouts yesterday. He invaded Dana White's blackjack game with the Palms Casino. That was a very interesting encounter. Shaun, enough about Colby and about someone who's not fighting. Tyron Woodley is a champion, long-term champion now in the welterweight division. What have you made of his demeanor this week? And he's almost an afterthought because we're talking about Ben Askren, we're talking about Colby Covington, talking about Usman. How about Tyron Woodley? He's the champion.
That's kind of a theme for Tyron, though, isn't it? Every single one of Tyron's fights, he is not the story. If it's Darren Till's the story. He's this undefeated guy coming up. He's going to take out Tyron. Damian Maia is the story over this incredible run he's been on. Wonder Boy's the story about, oh, man, this karate guy, this is the guy to take out Tyron. This is just how it is for Tyron Woodley, and I feel like this week he has really accepted that, embraced that, and also, I mean, you mentioned Ben Askren. I think Ben Askren's presence has also really changed Tyron's persona this week in a positive way, where I think a lot of fans have noted, I know I've gotten a lot of messages about it, I think you guys have as well. this is a different Tyron than we've really seen ever. Just we're seeing him open up more, be more fun. It just didn't seem to enjoy himself more. Usually he is a very focused individual on fight week. He is very serious. This week we've seen him joking the whole time. Ben Askren's rapping with him. He's writing raps for Ben Askren. It's been enjoyable to see.
Whoa, Hey guys, we're no longer in front of the T-Mobile Arena. Sometimes picograms get into someone's system and you have to change locations unexpectedly at a moment's notice, or maybe just security kicked us out of that area. Anyway, we're now at the hotel room in Las Vegas. We're going to continue right where we left off, the UFC 235 preview show.
Before we were rudely
interrupted by MGM T-Mobile security. The last thing that I had started to ask you guys before we were unceremoniously jettisoned from the area, Shaun, was the co-main event. Tyron Woodley, Kamaru Usman for the welterweight title. Who are you picking?
Well, now I'm going to try to re-figure out where I was. I came into this week believing strongly that Tyron Woodley would defend his welterweight title. I felt like it was a bad stylistic matchup for Kamaru Usman. I will say, throughout the week, Kamaru Usman has been impressive. He has felt like he has belonged here. He has exuded, I guess, just an aura of belonging and confidence at the weigh-ins that we were just at. Paints his face with the Nigerian flag, and again, he just felt like he deserved to be there. That being said, it's just a tough stylistic matchup for Kamaru Usman. I feel like everything he is really good at, Tyron Woodley is better at. I don't know how he gets it done. I think Tyron Woodley takes this.
Chuck, to you, Woodley versus Usman.
I was the fool who basically picked Darren Till, remember?
I do remember that.
I won't make that mistake again. I think Woodley, I agree with you what you just said. I think that he is just better in every aspect of the fight. I think he's been in these moments now, and he fights with a chip on his shoulder. I did like what Usman was saying basically about, I don't know if he's going to want to go as deep as I'm going to go in this fight, whatever he said. And that's cool to hear. But I also was watching Woodley through that whole thing. I think he's used to this sort of thing, and I just can't pick against him. I really can't this time. So I'm going with Woodley. I think after watching what he did to Till, I think it was something like 57 significant strikes to nothing. It was like so one-sided. I could see something like that again. I could see a really big performance. Oh, wow. But Usman, the fact that his last how many fights have gone the distance, I think that it may end up more cautious than necessary, maybe. And so I'm going to go with Woodley by decision.
Wait, so you could see a blowout, it seems like.
I could see that scenario. Yeah, I could see that scenario. But it's tough. I don't know. I'm going Woodley. I don't know if it might be a little closer than that, but I'm going to take Woodley by decision.
To another very big welterweight fight on this card, Ben Askren making his UFC debut against Robbie Lawler. I feel like Ben Askren has been kind of the star of the week.
The people's main event.
It's the people's main event, to borrow from our good friend Ariel Helwani. And it seems like Ben Askren is kind of stolen the show. It's his UFC debut. He's
more than Colby Covington, maybe?
Colby Covington has done a good job as well, inserting himself into the conversation, which is appreciated. But Ben Askren doesn't need to insert himself into the conversation because he's become almost the conversation. Shaun, I wanted to ask you, does it feel that way? Does it feel like Ben Askren is almost the star of UFC 235?
I mean, it somewhat does feel like that, right? He's not out here with a title. He's not out here with belts or all these accolades. But he is getting engagement on a level that I don't know that any of these other fighters are, at least throughout this week. We see it with video views. We see it with just engagement with the website. People are interested in Ben Askren, and I understand why. I mean, this is a moment that we've wanted for a long time. He left Bellator, if I'm not wrong, in 2013. That's basically 6 years ago. We have wondered how good this guy is for so long. He was so far away on the other side of the world in Asia with one championship. He wasn't getting the type of fights we always wanted him to see, and it felt like he was doomed to sort of fall in that Fedor Emelianenko spot where it's just one of the best guys to ever do it that we didn't see fight in the UFC, and all of a sudden a trade happens. Who knew that could happen? And now he's here, and he's super engaging. We even saw it at the weigh-in. He kind of like one-up Dana White in a way. Dana White goes to shake hands, and he kind of big-ups him, and it was just, he's just an entertaining guy, and it's been cool to have him around.
It's fascinating because he, at one point, was thought of as, here's this boring wrestler, this really boring fighter. I believe Dana White tweeted a few years ago that more boring than watching flies fuck? That's what Dana White tweeted. That's not my
waiting to see if you were gonna say.
That's not those are not my words. That is the UFC president's tweet quoting that. And there is still some underlying things with him and Dana White. And I wanted to see, Chuck, can you give us some insight? Ben Askren at the what would have been the face-off between him and Robbie Lawler at weigh-ins, he went up to Dana White. Dana White put his hand out, wouldn't shake his hand, was kind of drawn at him. It seemed like it was mostly joking, but what do you think is going on there between these two guys?
First, what does Dana have against the smaller weight classes? Why does he want to watch them?
He didn't say fly weights, he said flies.
Oh, no. No, but, I do think Ben Askren has a little bit more of a bigger view of what's going on. I think that has sort of transcended the moment a little bit, which is fun because the partition was up for so long. Like we mentioned, I think he's a fighter's fighter. He's one of those guys that diehards who've watched him for so long, especially in some of those fights where it's like a Koreshkov fight where he like outstruck him by like 250-3 or something like that. You look at those types of things and you keep wondering for all of this time, what happens if he fights these guys in the UFC? Well, we're finally at that moment, and it's just been surreal seeing him with the UFC across his chest and interacting with Dana White on stages and just all of that stuff. And he told me specifically, he's his Instagram has been like 10 times more followers since he was announced he was fighting, and his Twitter has been completely different. And I think it's just fun, man. I mean, it's just one of those situations. He's a dominant fighter. We've never seen him tested. Now he's going to fight a guy that everybody knows. The big knock on him was he hasn't really fought anybody that we think can compete with him. Well, here we are, and I think that's the imagination of that has made it a lot more fun than your normal fight week. It's that bang for the buck right in the middle of the pay-per-view, and it just adds that extra dimension.
Does Robbie Lawler, at 36 years old, after 18 years in this sport, coming off of serious knee surgery, torn ACL, torn meniscus, does he have another run in him in this welterweight division, do you think?
First of all, it's incredible to me when you say his age. 36 years old, he feels like he should be 43, right? Like, he's been in this since the beginning. Him and Diego Sanchez both, and Jeremy Stevens you could even throw in there. 3 guys on this card that have just been through multiple different eras of the sport, from the Spike to Fox to now ESPN. These guys have seen it through its existence. That's got to be just a very surreal thing for those guys. Does he have another run in him? I'm never going to tell you no with Robbie Lawler, because I think if you would have asked anybody that 5 years ago, they would have told you no. He was the guy out there in Strikeforce losing to Lorenz Larkin, just kind of being fed to prospects, and he comes into the UFC and becomes champion. I mean, who knows? Has 3 consecutive Fight of the Year winners for our website, MMA Fighting. It doesn't feel like he has another run in him. I mean, he's had a tough stretch of late.
Right.
He's coming off that loss to Hatfield Dos Anjos, but I wouldn't say no. I mean, and it's certainly against Ben Askren. I mean, Ben Askren, you know what Ben's going to do. He's going to come in, and like he told you, he's going to wrestle the shit out of you. That's what his game plan is.
A lot of cussing in this preview show.
And Robbie Lawler, for whatever his skill set is, he has some incredibly underrated defensive wrestling. It is. No one wrestles Robbie Lawler and really succeeds. Johnny Hendricks tried. He did it a little bit. But it is incredibly difficult to keep Robbie Lawler down. And if that's your game plan, to do 15 minutes of that, that's a tough ask.
I always feel like the quieter he is, Robbie Lawler, before a fight, the more deadly he shows up. Like, it's crazy because I think he doesn't really love the fight promotion. I don't think he really loves the hype.
Sure? Really?
But I mean, we remember when he fell asleep with the Tim Kennedy before that one. Like, I mean, I remember specifically the UFC 189 build-up. And basically, Conor McGregor is stealing the whole show, and him and Rory McDonald are just sitting there basically as extras through this whole process. Well, what happens in that fight? You get one of the fights of the year, maybe one of the best fights of all time, and maybe Robbie Lawler's best performance when it really comes down to it, because it just felt like he could go fathoms deep. He was never going to quit in that fight. I kind of get that vibe a little bit, like when you're for this fight, because it's been all Askren. He's kind of just the extra figure in this whole scenario. It's really interesting, and so I don't know how much he has left in him, but I could certainly see him showing up in a big-time moment like this, at this point in his career, and surprising us one more time.
Who wins, Chuck, Lawler or Askren?
I'm going to take Askren ultimately, though, and it's funny because you know how you get cast in a certain way of thinking, and this is the way he's been able to fight, what he's able to do, his doggedness. It's not like he's going to not telegraph exactly what he plans to do. He's going to go out there, he's going to try to put him on his back and be heavy on top of him and finish the fight from the top.
I could see him doing that. I know that Robbie Lawler's pretty tough. I mean, Johnny Hendricks had a similar idea. It wasn't like he could do that at will. He did get a little bit of that in those couple of fights, but I could see Askren basically getting that done.
Man, I hate to keep agreeing picks with you, but I think it is Ben Askren's time, right? Like he is coming in here, and I feel like this is a moment he has wanted for so long, and he doesn't seem like the type to really crumble under pressure. He is handling all of this very coolly. He's even keel throughout this week, joking, laughing, and enjoying the experience. It's a tough stylistic matchup. I repeat that again. It really feels like the UFC said, "Hey, you wanna swim the sharks? Have fun with this one." Instead of throwing him a Darren Till or somebody who maybe has questionable wrestling. I don't know what it's going to look like. If it looks like the fight Ben Askren wants it to look like, I think he's obviously going to take it at that point. Yeah. It wouldn't shock me if Robbie Lawler comes out here and gets a first round knockout, but I'm going to pick Ben Askren by decision.
Let's quickly go through the main card fights. The opener is Cody Garbrandt. You wrote a great article about Garbrandt this week, Chuck. He's facing Pedro Munoz in kind of a bounce back fight for him. Start with you, Chuck. How do you see that fight playing out? Can Garbrandt rebound, bounce back from the
Dillashaw pick for me in a lot of ways? Pedro is such a unheralded kind of prospect. He's won a couple fights in a row, but he's the type of guy who silently, he's like an Assunção or one of those type of guys who just kind of silently just keeps beating people up. Then you get a psychologically maybe altered former champion, and we've seen these guys every now and again. They just never recover from something like that. He loses 2 times to Dillashaw, both times fairly devastating fashion. One of them he's really winning the fight and gets caught. Talking to him, he sounds like he's got it put behind him a little bit, but at the same time, you can't help know that he is that fiery competitor. We know that about him. You don't know to what extent he's pushing it back, but it just keeps coming back over him. These scenarios. It'd be really interesting to see if he has that same mojo, the same swag. He gets in there and he likes to kind of clown on his opponents a little bit. If we see all that early and we see that he's kind of feeling good and he's in his rhythm, I would favor him to win the fight. I think he's a superior fighter. But if that's gone for some reason, I could see it going the other way very easily.
What do you think, Shaun? How do you see that fight playing out? Because Munoz is 17-3. He's beaten the likes of Brian Caraway.
He's on a nice run. I mean, he has won 6 of his last 7 very quietly in this bantamweight division. And it's funny because I talked to him on Wednesday at Media Day, and he is very acutely aware that Cody Garbrandt and his team wanted this fight. This is the fight they actually asked for his return. They targeted Pedro. They think they see something there. That's very much in Pedro's mind. And he's like, hey, if you want to give me this fight, I will absolutely take it, because I don't know that he was going to get a fight this big otherwise. I am going to pick Cody Garbrandt. I think he is still one of the best bantamweights in the world. He is absolutely in that discussion, maybe top 3, depending on where you want to throw Marlon Moraes. But I just cannot get what he did to Dominic Cruz out of my head. I mean, I was there in the arena when he did that. It was an iconic performance. No one ever in the history of this sport has done that to Dominic Cruz. And TJ Dillashaw is very, very good, so I will not fault 2 losses to TJ Dillashaw. I'm picking Cody Garbrandt.
Anyway, also on the main card, big women's strawweight fight between Tecia Torres and Weili Zhang. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Start with you, Shaun. How do you see this fight playing out? It's kind of one of those classic prospect versus still elite veteran type fights.
It's obvious to me that the UFC sees something in Weili Zhang, right? Because this is someone who is only 2-0 in the promotion. Her last one was very, very impressive. She comes in and just ruins Jessica Aguilar, becomes the first woman to submit Jessica Aguilar. Obviously, that is not the prime Jessica Aguilar of old, where we used to talk about her as the best 115er in the world. But she's still Jessica Aguilar. Yeah. Like, that is an impressive feat nonetheless. It's surprising to me that they're throwing her into the deep end of the pool this quickly, because Tecia Torres is not an easy mark by any means. She may have hit a tough stretch of late, but you look at who she actually loses to. Joanna Jędrzejczyk, Rose Namajunas, and Jessica Andrade. Yeah. Those are the best women in the entire woman. Or those are the 3 best women in the entire division.
She carries I feel like she carries like something about her, which I really like. There's something about her confidence. I like it. I'm interested. I was talking to you guys earlier. I'm interested in this fight. It's kind of one of those sleepers on the main card because there's so many good fights. But for some reason, this one is kind of like this kind of unheralded special attraction. I'm anxious to see it. I like Tecia Torres ultimately in it, just given the given her experience, and like you guys mentioned, there's no shame in losing to the people she's lost to. I feel like it's probably going to be her fight, but I do feel like it's going to be very, very competitive. I could see it going either way. It might be a type of split decision or something like that, but I think Tecia Torres probably gets it done.
And Zhang is the first ever Chinese fighter actually ranked in the UFC and has a chance to be one of the most successful Chinese fighters ever in really MMA in North America. Anyway, this is a really, really stacked card, and we're not going to be able to get to every fight, but was there anything else that you guys wanted to highlight from the prelims, from the undercard, that we did not mention? Chuck, I just want to start with you.
I mean, Zabit, man, I mean, how are you going to... That fight to me is very intriguing on a lot of levels, but the main one being that Jeremy Stephens does hit hard, but also Jeremy Stephens is like, I think you were mentioning earlier, is a whole different human being. Like, going into this fight, you know, he's went through some hard times, some very big introspective moments, and, you know, some very harrowing ideas in his mind about suicide and things like that. Tough that he's fighting this guy, Zabit, who's basically being pegged as a future champion. I think he's probably going to end up a champion, or he's going to be fighting for that belt very soon. And you just look at him, man. He's how wiry and how much strength he produces out of that wiry body. Going to be very tough for Jeremy Stephens. But I think if he is able to land and do something in that fight, that'd be a big moment for him. So I'm looking at that one as kind of a potential, something to circle as one of the fights of the night.
How about you, Shaun? What do you think?
Well, I want to add to that, too. I mean, this is not the first time Jeremy Stephens has been thrown into this position either. He's kind of been cast in this role over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Doo-Hoo Choi, Josh Emmett, both of those fights turned out very badly for the young up-and-comer trying to challenge Jeremy Stephens. So it seems like Little Heathen still has some gas left in his tank, certainly. I want to highlight Mickey Gall versus Diego Sanchez was a little lower on the card. That is a fascinating fight to me, just purely from the perspective of, speaking to Mickey Gall. He really idolized Diego Sanchez in a way coming up. Mickey Gall was 13 years old when Diego Sanchez fought Nick Diaz. That's unreal to me, how long this guy has been around in our lives. And just a few years ago, Diego Sanchez beat Mickey Gall's mentor, really, Jim Miller. Right. And that one hurt Mickey Gall, he said. So it is a very much a changing of the guard type of fight, which seems to be sort of how Diego Sanchez is used now. But it's just fun to still have Diego around, man. He is such a wild man still. He still has that murderous look in his eye anytime you have face-offs or weigh-ins or anything like that. I hope we still get this guy for a little bit more. But it is also nice to have Mickey Gall back. He has been out for a long time, and at one point, he was thought of as a very nice prospect. He's kind of lost a lot of momentum since then, but it should be a good one.
Stay tuned to MMAfighting.com for that. For information about Shaun's poor laptop from the official weigh-ins. Hopefully that stays intact. And of course, for all of your pre- and post-fight coverage of UFC 235 and anything that Colby Covington is doing this week in Las Vegas. Stay tuned to MMA Fighting.